pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Our Historical Society was formed in 1984, when it was recognised there was a need to preserve our past history for the future generations. We've recorded many of the stories of the pioneers that helped build the town of Geraldton, which later became Innisfail. The name Geraldton was changed to Innisfail because a Russian ship bound for Geraldton in Western Australia ended up here in far north Queensland. So the name change took place in 1910 to stop that confusion. In a brief history of the cemetery, the Queensland government created the Geraldton Cemetery Reserve with an area of 4.45 hectares on the 25th of July 1885. It's unclear when the first burials took place. However, the earliest headstone that we have listed is the grave of Gladys Couchman, and she's aged 20 months, and we'll be visiting Gladys's grave this evening. The Innisfail Cemetery demonstrates an unusual pattern where Irish, Chinese and Pacific Islanders dominated the region in the last 2 decades of the 19th century. Initial burials were in sections 1 and 2, fronting River Avenue, so they were down there in that lower area where all the trees are. But that's very low ground, and we have a very high rainfall here in Innisfail, with rivers and creeks frequently flooding. So after a particularly damaging flood around 1918, after the cyclone that destroyed most of the then town, all gravestones were removed to higher ground, the ones that were over there in that area, in sections 4 and 5, and sections 3, which also fronts River Avenue, is higher, and these gravestones have not been removed. So this area here is as it was. And gradually, as the town grew, more land was secured, and we're fortunate that our cemetery has remained in one location, whereas in some other towns, they have an old cemetery and a new cemetery. We just keep going that way and buying more land. We hope that you enjoy hearing the stories that we've chosen today. Our first is Sir Joseph McAvoy. He's actually a CBE and has a knighthood. So we'll talk about Sir Joseph, and the story will be read by Mike Keating. Then we have Cecil Trower, who was 5 days old when he died in 1928. We have his mother, who died in 1941, and then a memorial to her brother, who was killed in France in 1916. So that story will be read by Paul Keenan. Then we have Mr. Mamoni. He was aged 31 with his date of death in 1934, and that story will be read by Jeff Thomas. And that is it's tied up with the Black Hand Gang, so that's an interesting story. Then we have Ethel Prothero, and Ethel was age 43 when she died in 1937. Her story will be read by Tanya Quirk. Ethel was a World War I nurse. And then we have Gladys Couchman, who was 20 months and is the oldest headstone. And we're going to have the story told by Kerry Linton as her mother. And then we have Martin O'Donoghue. He was actually aged 87 when he died in 1926. And the story will be by Bill Farnsworth. And then we will talk about the Good Samaritan sisters who came here right in the very early days. There's no more Good Samaritan nuns here anymore, but we will talk about the 2 nuns that are buried here. And they died in 1949 and 1938, and I will be doing their story. I would also like to thank our volunteers, members and our story readers. Our Historical Society and Museum is totally reliant on our members and volunteers to maintain and preserve our history. They're a small, very small, dedicated group, but we're grateful for their commitment. So thank you all for coming and for your support. And before we move off, we're going to move off down in this direction, but I just want to point out the toilet facilities here are normally open with lights on, but apparently there's work going on with them at the moment. So if anybody needs the facilities, the next one that's available, if you can see just up on that next hill there, they've actually put lights on. So it's a bit of a walk to get up there, But we will be coming back around that way to a grave over here. So we will be passing by here, but I just wanted you to be aware that those facilities are normally open, but they won't be tonight. So thank you all. And we'll head off in this direction, and we're going to do Mr. Cecil Trower first, and that's Bill, will be our reader.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Round in front. Evening, my name's Paul Clement, and this is a story of a grave that found me. Jeff, who's walking around here as a cane cutter, and I offered to take tours of the town for Art Deco and history. And I offered to look after the church side. And I went to the church to do some research on bits and pieces. And while I was there, I came across St Anthony of Padua. It's a statue on the left-hand side as you come in the front door. And on that statue was an engravement which said Private C.H. Coffey, KIA, 5th of 9th, 16. Now, to most people that would have meant nothing, but I'm wearing a Matt McLaughlin Battleground Tour headpiece. So my wife and I did that tour in 2018, and we were around the place that is involved in this. Sorry. Try that. Better?
Yes.
Good. So we went on this tour, and so when I looked at that, I could see the date was the 5th of 9th, 2016. I knew that was Pozieres, because my grandfather fought at Pozieres around about the same time. So this gravestone has 5 names on it, 2 bodies, one who's not here, and one who's buried somewhere else, and one who's buried in Sandgate. But it all goes back to down the bottom there, is erected by N.C. Coffey. Now Harriet Beckett, or Harriet Bennett, was born in England, came to Australia, and married the first Cecil Coffey, and lived down near Mackay. Now in 1910, her husband, Cecil, disappeared, went missing, as the police report says. He just left her, and left her with the children, Ethel and young Cecil. In 1915, Cecil enlists to fight in World War I. Now the story becomes complex in parts, because Cecil's there, but he's not there. Young Cecil's above, Ethel's here, the father, Eric, is over there, Nellie is in Sandgate, so they're all over the place. But the story goes as such. She comes up here to be with her daughter while she's having a child. In 1928, it's a very special year in Innisfail. That's when the church is opened, after being rebuilt from the devastation of 1918. Nellie gives the church the statue of St Anthony of Padua. Now, who does St Anthony look after? Lost things and lost souls. So she gives that to the church. She gives that in September. Her grandson dies in November. He lives 4 days. So then she's also donating a headstone to her family. Cecil, the one who's overseas and dies, he dies at a farm called Milket Farm, a battleground. We lost 11,000 Australians wounded or killed fighting over a farm. We didn't win it. In fact, when Cecil dies on the 5th of 9th, which they don't decide until a year later that he dies then, they dig up what they can. They find a bit of his head, a couple of collarbones, a bit of his back, part of his arm, and some of his leg. Not much. Probably wasn't him, but they did find his dog tags. Nellie writes to the Australian government asking for his possessions. She gets a prayer book. That's all he gets. He's only been there a month in France, killed within a month. She then is told that he's going to be buried at a Commonwealth graveyard just down the road. She then writes to them to get a photo of it. He's killed in 1916. Any ideas when she gets the photo? 1932. And it cost her 10 shillings. Which was a lot of money at that time. This story, we end up with Nellie, Harriet Bennett, who's lost a son, a husband of his own accord, and her only grandson, because I can't find any details about any more children. They're buried here in a Catholic grave, because Nellie never changes her name, never remarries, just goes through life. Ends up in Sandgate, dies in Sandgate. Ethel dies here. Poor Cecil, well, perhaps he's over in a graveyard in Beaumont-Hamel in France. And we end up with the story of a grave that's in here, which is part of our graveyard, but nobody would have known about. Except for some bizarre reason, I knew that the 5th of 9th, 1916, was around when the Battle of Pozieres was fought, because my grandfather was there. And this grave represents probably the sadness of the 20s, the sadness of life. Nellie comes to Australia. She outlives her daughter. She outlives her son. She outlives her grandson. Nellie Coffey. I think she's a great person. Thank you.
Now we're just going to walk in front of these graves.
What are the chances? Different mark.
Good evening all. We're talking from an extract from the Innisfail District Historical Society in 1995. And speaking. Hello. It's better. Well, once again, I'm speaking as Sir Joseph McAvoy. It's nice to see some of the McAvoy family here too. Well, first I'd like to thank for the invitation to attend tonight. It's a privilege to be able to come to talk to you about my life standing by my graveside. First up, I acknowledge gratitude for my parents, who on both sides of the family were from Ireland. They followed gold mining in Gympie and then Charters Towers. And after the Dalrymple survey to the Johnson River, it was reported that this was the most fertile land looking from the Basilisk to Bartlefree, the most fertile strip of land anywhere in the world. I think that might have attracted our family to come to Innisfail. I was born on the 26th of February 1910. When they got here, of course, the only way they could get to their selection was by Chinese banana punt up the river and then to Victory Creek. They'd walked for about a mile and a half to where they built a home. I think the flood was in January 1913. Everyone got on the roofs of their houses in the flood. Mr. Smith offered to swim to get help, to get a boat. He only went about 20 metres and went down. I remember the flood and then pulling a sheet of iron out of the roof, and my older sister and I sitting in the rain on top of the roof. The next blow was the 1918 cyclone. We didn't have a telephone, but I was with my father riding down the road when a neighbour said, "Look, there's going to be a cyclone here in about 2 hours." That was at 4 o'clock. So we went back home, had our evening meal, and the window started to blow in, and everything in the house started to crumble. The veranda blew off, so everyone went out to the shed where the stables were because the posts were up high. It was very cold. We were in there for a long time when the house went to pieces. This torch is not on. That's not here. Hang on a sec. That's better. I'm right, thanks. When the house went to pieces and it sped into the roof of the shed, the wind was fierce. We no sooner got out with hurricane lamps and all the lights went out. All the family turned back into the shed except me. I finished up with our 3 Aboriginal boys, going up through a cane pack to where Russo's farm is now. They'd been clearing and burning the stumps of a big flame tree that was on the side of the hill. They grabbed a chunk of wood and started a fire on the windward side, so we all 4 lay down and slept on the other side of that, with protection from the wind and the warmth of the fire. When the eye of the cyclone came, we were on the wrong side of the stump, and the boys did the same thing again. We slept there all night. Next morning, you couldn't tell where we were because our houses were all left notwithstanding. I vividly remember the coastal range. All the trunks of the trees were standing up without a branch left on them. They were like props. My father came from Ireland, where cattle were common. He was a keen cattleman, and that suited me. There were the ponies, horses, and a good cattle dog to round them up, but nowhere to put them. The early settlers seemed to have partially cleared some land on their blocks and then vanished. This was then free grassland for our cattle. I knew we had to keep track of them, so that's how I spent my childhood, my school days on a pony. When the floods were over and the ferry wasn't working, a bit of a no-hope as far as primary school went. My parents offered to send me to college. I went to Charles Towers into a classroom with people who were about to do the scholarship exams. I didn't know what passing was or analysis was. I never did it. That was all Dutch to me, so I soon got dumped out of that class. I did bookkeeping and accountancy, gained my diploma, so my parents said, you may go back for another year. But I didn't know what I was going to do. It was a real battle. So I just scraped through that exam at the end of the year. So realising at 14 or 15 years of age that I hadn't prepared myself for life, I thought if I can go to Nudgee College and get away from a small school where I was more interested in all the sports rather than schoolwork, my parents agreed. I went to Nudgee College in Brisbane. And I found if I got up early in the morning, a couple of hours before bell, I could do the memory work and written work in the evening study. I was successful in getting through junior and senior, and quite well too, I must say. I then decided to offer my life to the missionaries of the Sacred Heart and went to the novitiate in New South Wales. After 6 months, they told me this wasn't the sort of life for me. I came home pretty well a nervous wreck, but the family were very supportive. With hard work, football, cricket and dancing, I started to quickly get back on track. I managed the farm as my father had died the same year that I was in the novitiate. In my personal life, I married Mary Irene Doolan, known only as Molly. We had 5 children, 4 boys and 1 girl. My son William became a Marist brother. My daughter Marianne is buried here beside me. She died when she was 19 months old. My sons Joe and Vince still reside in Innisfail today. After approximately 15 years of successful farming in partnership with my brother Jim, Philly Burke, one of the ex-committee member of Gundi, encouraged me to come on the committee with them. I was nominated and got on the committee 3 years later on the executive, and 3 years later, in 1952, chairman of the executive and a member of the Queensland Cane Growers Council. In 1963, I was elected chairman of the Queensland Cane Growers Council and held that position for 20 years. This position embraces the chairman of the Australian Cane Growers, a role in the National Farmers Union and the Council of Agriculture. At this time, the sugar and dairy industry were not acknowledged or represented to the extent of other industries in the country. It was well worthwhile. I notified the industry and the CSR man made a man available to join the same society. Prime Minister Menzies got a fright with only just winning the election. So he decided to get in touch to set up a Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Committee to Cabinet. As the President of the National Farmers Union, I went and presented our views to the Cabinet. There was always an interesting proposal to do with drought bonds. And I always remember Malcolm Fraser taking me to task about it, with a differing opinions between wool and sugar growers. I was responsible to the National Farmers Union moving from Sydney to Canberra. In my 3rd year, I was then chairman of the National Farmers and the Australian Primary Producers, like the cane growers and the sugar industry. We then had membership of the International Federation of Agricultural Producers, which was farmers from all over the world. I was the first cane growers representative, but I declined the executive because who didn't have the support of wool growers or other industries. The next term we met, I was appointed Senior Vice President with a view to the presidency in the next term. I had the committees group with also met with the General Conference, and the South African and the British West Indians nominated me for the chair of that group. I accepted based on being the only representative from Australian sugar. I could intervene, and it was very successful. There were many big growers and differing views, all well argued and debated. As chairman of the National Farmers Union, we could have a nomination on the Immigration Advisory Council as we were bringing cane cutters in from Europe and worldwide. I was asked to take the position. I did. I spent 9 years on the Advisory Council. In 1963, sugar expanded and the achievement was how Million Harbour was won. It was agitated for 30 years to develop Million Harbour. The Advocate front page was full of submissions of why Million Harbour should be developed. We prepared our case and submitted the figures. We couldn't know the actual, but made an informed guess on how much it would cost and the benefit it would be sending sugar from Million instead of taking it by light into cans. The figures were colossal, but when Million Harbour was finally opened, it was a great achievement. I had high regard for the ministers and prime ministers of all sides of the political fence that I dealt with over the years, particularly in those days because they were straight down the line. I used to make a comment that I certainly preferred to have put a case to them rather than go to any court. In the early days, I had to fly in DC-3s out of cans. At the airport there, they could take them. I used to get airsick. However, once they stopped using the DC-3s and I flew in jets, I didn't get airsick. I then went to many destinations: Sydney, Paris, Delaware, the Cameroons, Central Equatorial Africa, for meetings on the International Executive. I did that for many years. In 1969, I was awarded a CBE. The CBE was initiated in 1970 by King George V for a recognition of great service by its civilians and is the commander of the Order of the British Empire. The knighthood came in 1976. I had no political affiliation with any party, so I'm not aware of who nominated me. But it was for service to the sugar industry. In my opinion, I think my service was to all Australian primary producers. My service to the farmers and in Australia probably outweighed the sugar industry. They knew sugar was my life, my responsibility. I was in the industry for over 60 years. I died at the age of 92 on the 6th of July 2002. You all know the bridge you drive over to go to Cairns. That was named after me, the Sir Joseph McAvoy Bridge. As a nudgy old boy, they have a portrait of me on their website. They call me the Colossus of the sugar industry. I'm not so sure about that, but it sounds quite nice, doesn't it? Thank you.
Okay, everybody, we're going to now go to Mr. Mamoni. Well, just let's wait for others to catch up, just in case. Yeah, there's still people coming, so we won't start just yet. A little puff after the walk.
Everyone here properly?
No, not quite.
Not quite.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's good. At least we're away from the traffic a little bit now, so yeah. Okay, I can still see some torches coming, so.
Yeah, are we safe? Boy, this is...
At least he's down there.
We'll be keeping an eye on it.
Absolutely. Okay, we've still got a couple coming, so we'll just wait.
Okay.
That's interesting.
I'm going to tell this story from the point of view of a character who isn't real. I'll give you some hints through the story at the beginning of it, and some of you will guess who the character is, I'm sure, but it doesn't matter if you don't. But the story that I'm going to tell is real. Okay? So So my name's Barney. I used to be a cane cutter. I'm here to tell you the story of this guy, Nicola Mamoni, and another guy called Giovanni Iacona. So me and a mate, Roo, used to come up from Melbourne for the season to cut cane. We came here every year for 17 years. In that time, I never knew Mamoni. People said he ran a shop at Brilliant with another bloke, but I did meet Iacona a few times. He lived or worked for the Denaros at Cowley, and our gang cut the farm, Patani's farm next door for a couple of years. It was a bit strange though, we came back one year and Iacona wasn't there. When we asked what happened to him, no one would talk about it. It took us ages to find out what happened. Because it seems Iacona got caught up in the Black Hand thing that was going on at the time. It all blew up on the 6th of March 1934. It was a Tuesday morning. Moni and a mate of his called Booty were walking down Edith Street. They got to a butcher shop just in the street, just next to where the Grand Central Hotel is, and they saw Iacona coming the other way. As soon as Iacona saw them, he pulled a gun out of his pocket. Mamoni and Booty turned to run away, and Iacona started shooting. He shot Mamoni 5 times in the back, in the middle of the street. People said Mamoni was screaming and cursing at Iacona as he fell, and he finished up face down in the gutter. They said Iacona then just walked up and shot him again in the back of the head. So the question on everyone's lips at the time, including the police, was why? It seems that Mamoni was the main Black Hand gang bloke in Innisfail. You heard from Lapalia's documentary, you would have seen Lapalia's documentary. D'Agostino was the main man in Ingham. Mamoni was the main man here. Mamoni's game was extortion. He would send a letter signed the Black Hand to his chosen victim and demand money to be paid or dire consequences. And Mamoni was a bad man. His society's Black Hand shot people, they blew up houses, they put bombs in cars and tractors, they set fire to cane fields, they even poisoned one bloke's horses. So everyone was afraid of the Black Hand. That's why no one had talked to us about what happened to Iacona. Where am I to? Okay, so Mamoni was also smart, and he distanced himself from what was going on. So he had other people doing things. He'd have someone write the letter, he'd have someone deliver it, collect the money. So that it was always one step away. And that's where Iacona came in, because Mamoni used Iacona to deliver letters. He wrote in one letter, the society prefers Iacona to collect the money because the society knows that Iacona will keep silent. So in other words, he used Iacona because he knew Iacona was frightened and he'd do whatever he said. This worked well until about January of that year. Denaro gave a letter to Iacona to give to, Mamoni gave a letter to Iacona to give to Denaro, the bloke that Iacona had worked for. And Iacona said, no, I'm not going to do that. Can't. Mamoni left it for a while, but Iacona still didn't deliver the letter. So on the 11th of February, Mamoni, this bloke Booty that he was with in the street, and another guy called Parisi went to see Iacona at where he was living at that point, at Patani's barracks down at Cowley. And they said, we have to talk about this. So I took him out into the cane down some headlands, and Mamoni thought he was being kind, and he read the letter that he was writing to Denaro, and in it he said, Iacona is not a member of the society. But it wasn't good enough for Iacona, and he still said, no, I'm not going to deliver it. That was enough for Mamoni. Booty and Parisi held him down. Mamoni pulled a razor out of his pocket, and he cut off the tops of both his ears. Iacona passed out, and they just walked off and left him there. When he came to, he made his way to the highway, and someone found him, called an ambulance and took him to hospital in Innisfail. When he got to the hospital, the doctor said, "What happened?" And he said, "A horse bit both my ears off." And the doctor apparently said, "The horse's mouth was that big, it would have taken your whole head off." But he wouldn't tell. Even when the police came, he wouldn't tell them what happened. And after he was arrested and after the police said, "Why didn't you tell us in the hospital what happened?" And he said, "They're no good. Too many people. Mamoni make trouble for me again." So he's still afraid of Mamoni. His injuries were severe and he was in hospital for 10 days. On the 20th of February, he left hospital and went back to Cowley to recuperate. He stayed there for 2 weeks. That's when on the 6th of March, took his gun, he came into town looking for Mamoni and found him. Because the street was full of people, and one of the people in the street was Copper. So he was arrested straight away. But he didn't resist, and he said, "Yes, I did it." They said, "Why did you do it?" He said, "He cut my ears off, I shoot him dead. He made no more trouble for me." He said, "He did a job on me, I did a better job on him." So he's really unrepentant, unremorseful. He was consequently then, of course, arrested and charged with murder. Also, Parisi and Booty were charged with wounding on the evidence that they helped cut Iacona's ears off. They all went to trial in Cairns in April. Iacona was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Booty and Parisi were found guilty of wounding and sentenced to 7 years. But it didn't quite end for them there. The government at the time, as they do now, had a policy of deporting non-citizens who'd been convicted of serious crimes. So these guys were then deported to Italy. They were terrified of that because in Italy at the time Mussolini was in charge and Mussolini hated the mafia. So the way that the Italian authorities dealt with these guys is they sent them to the worst prison they had, and this prison was called Itari Island. And apparently it was said that it made the French Devil's Island prison look like a resort. Again, it didn't end there because Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, Abyssinia at the time, and he needed soldiers, so he just went to the prisons, grabbed prisoners, put uniform on them and said, "Go fight." Because these guys had no training, and the rest of the army hated them, so they were just given suicide missions, basically. So in 1936, word came back that Iacona and Booty had both been killed in action. It said they'd been speared by Abyssinians during battle. There was no real word of what happened to Parisi. So after that, we didn't hear much about the Black Hand here. Things died down. The money was gone, war started, everyone had other things to think about, so things settled down. And you might understand now why Mamoni has no headstone. Thank you.
Well done. Okay,
Yep. Yep. Glasses.
actually, if you're in front, you probably hear better rather than behind me. The sound's going that way. Okay, that's fine.
It's coming through good.
Okay, great. So when
I'll just check and make sure that everybody's good. Before Gladys's mother tells the story, As it's the oldest headstone in the cemetery, and because of the history of the Couchmans in Innisfail, in that very early time, or in Geraldton, I should be saying, the Historical Society is going to try and get a grant to actually restore this beautiful grave with the, you can tell that they were people of means for that time and when they lost their daughter so young. But I think it's a project that's worthwhile doing, just to try and perhaps acknowledge it, because a lot of people come to cemeteries and look for family and look for history. And I think we should acknowledge this as the first and oldest headstone in this Innisfail Geraldton Cemetery, as we were. Okay, I'll pass you over.
Hello, my name is Bessie Stevens-Moon, and I married Edwin Couchman in Townsville on the 23rd of August 1887. I was born in Greenock in Scotland. This is the grave of our daughter Gladys Couchman, and she was only 20 months old when she died in 1891, and her headstone is the oldest in the cemetery. My husband was only a young man of 22 years when he came out to Australia. He was a newly graduated engineer from Glasgow, and he came here along with the machinery for the Marillion Mill. He arrived in 1881, and when he arrived, nothing of the town existed. He was put ashore on the riverbank and left to find his own way out to the Marillion Mill site. After he completed the building of the mill and we married, we remained here for some years. He also did some gold prospecting with the explorer, Christy Palmerston, and actually found the gold himself for my wedding ring. He constructed a number of buildings in Geraldton, and the house where we lived, up on Rankin Street, is still standing and is recognised as the oldest house in Innisfail. He also built a sawmill on Means Creek, became a Justice of the Peace and sat on the Geraldton bench, and was a member of the Divisional Board for a time. He resigned from this position so that he could build bridges to the Divisional Board. The bridge over Bamboo Creek was also built by my husband in 1886, which is just over yonder.
So that's that one just over, you would have passed
That way.
it there, straight.
Edwin was the builder of the first hospital buildings in 1885 to 1886. Being a bit of an adventurer, he joined a group with Christy Palmerston, and they travelled by horseback to Herberton, using a bank of Aborigines to clear the way for them. Edwin and I were sad to leave Gladys here when we moved away, but we put a lovely headstone on the grave so that people could remember her. And she is not alone. Edwin's brother is here with her. He was bitten by a snake and died just a year after Gladys in 1892, and he's remembered here with a headstone too. An excerpt from the Cairns Post of the day reads, "At Maldiva, which is a mining town on the Tablelands, the smelter is running well now. There is considerable sickness about with enteric fever very prevalent. F.C. Couchman died from snake bite today. He was bitten at his camp and forwarded unattended on horseback to Maldiva. He was found unconscious on the road and died shortly after the doctor arrived. The deceased was brother to the manager of the Queensland plantation at Geraldton." Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to make... Just so that you can actually...
Testing. My name is Ethel May Crocker Road. I was born and grew up in Ipswich. I became a nurse after the Great War began, and I started my training in 1914. After basic training, I and the others in my group were sent overseas. We nursed in various places during the war, but mainly in Egypt. I must tell you about how we cared for the wounded. Firstly, a casualty clearing station was the place the wounded saw first. This was a series of tents near the front line. This was for emergency treatment prior to transfer to a larger hospital. Serious surgery was often performed at the clearing station in a bid to save a life. Some nurses were stationed at the casualty clearing station and were almost in the enemy's firing range. Next was an Australian General Hospital, which was usually fairly well equipped and adequately staffed. These hospitals were not stationary buildings as the battle plans dictated where the physical location of the General Hospital would be. The third stage of nursing was the Australian Auxiliary Hospital. These auxiliary hospitals were developed for the convalescence care of the wounded. Even there, the nurses were extremely hard work with hundreds of patients, and conditions were extreme. The heat, dust and flies were horrific. Our basic uniform for members of the Australian Army nursing staff consisted of a long grey straight skirt, long sleeve white blouse and long sleeve jacket with a Panama hat. The outdoor uniform was a long grey cape over a long grey dress with a small grey bonnet that had a chocolate bow and a long silk tail. Quite nice. The ward office uniform consisted of a long grey dress with starched collar, a stiff white apron plus a red cape, and a white veil was worn. Heavy black or grey stockings were worn with laced walking shoes or boots, all very hot and cumbersome in the extreme heat of Egypt. In the Egyptian campaign, we had to adapt to different types of nursing with malaria, cholera, dysentery and smallpox. Many of the nurses got malaria as the land was very unhealthy. There was also a very severe influenza epidemic which killed so many more. The patients had no strength to fight it. One nurse wrote home that our work was ghastly work, frightfully mutilated boys, most of whom died, and the gassed cases where the worst pain is to the eyes which puff up and blister. We were not just seeing the war from the sidelines of the hospital. We were in the same inhospitable climate, suffering from poor nutrition, overwork, and dealing with the stress of war injuries. The workload on us nurses was excessive, as the numbers of nurses available to care for the patients was quite low. The physical deprivations we were forced to endure created additional stress. My days usually started on the ward at 7:30 a.m. and went through until 8 p.m. with hardly time to eat or rest. We were very busy, I can tell you, and it was all for our boys, and they did appreciate it. Together with this, our isolation from home and having to cope with homesickness and worry about those we had left behind, it was quite an experience. But the nursing profession was not all work. We got to see places that we would have had no chance of seeing in our other lives. Nursing opened up opportunities for travel and other experiences during the war. Travel overseas would have been impossible for women like me. On our days off, we were able to be tourists and see the sights, when and where it was safe to do so. I remember we had a wedding in our group. One of our girls, Wills, married an officer she had nursed and fell in love with. They were married in the consulate at 9 a.m. and then at the English church at Port Side at 9:30 a.m. Wills wore her mess uniform of grey silk with cape and cap, and she carried a simple white prayer book as there were no flowers for a bouquet. All of us others wore our white coats and skirts, shoes and stockings, and Panama hats with brown veils. After the ceremony, we joined the happy couple in a private room at the Marine Palace Hotel for a wedding breakfast. This consisted of sandwiches, cake, coffee and cool drinks, and the wedding table was decorated with pink roses. It was lovely. Wills was not permitted to carry on nursing after she was married. When the war was over, we came home on the hospital ships with our soldiers. We were so pleased to get home and try and forget the horrors of war. I married my John, who worked with the Public Works Department, and we were transferred here to Innisfail in 1931. I was only 43 years of age when I passed away in 1937. I was given a lovely funeral and was honoured by having the Union Jack draped over my coffin to recognise my nursing service. Just about this, read you a poem which was found in a book from 1914 to 1918 war entitled The Kiora Kui, the magazine for the Anzacs in the Middle East, 1918. It's called Sister. Am I making funny noise? Who wakes you up at dawn of day with a generous dose of MDA, a vision sweet in white array, oh sister? Who slaps on performance boiling hot, rubs blue stone on a tender spot, whether you wanted to or not? Ah, sister. Who with a probe and a yards of gauze stirs round your wounds without a pause? Be brave, she says, and smiles because she's sister. Who sees that you have tidy hair, your face gets washed, your bed's made square? Who keeps your mind so free for care? Our sister. Who cares not when the lead you swing? Who gives to you a piece of string, yet tells the doctor everything? Yes, sister. Who smooths the pillow for your head and cuts for you your daily bread and sees you do not get unfed? O sister. A ministering angel, O art thou, who soothes the hot and fevered brow. It is to thee we humbly bow, dear sister. By Pat Murphy, AIF. Thank you.
Okay, we'll head back now for the last two, and they're up where we began.
Hello, my name is Martin O'Donoghue. It's good to be back above ground. It's not quite as windy down there. At the turn of the 18th century, I was the first state civil servant in the North Queensland town of Innisfail, which was known as Geraldton then, and remained so until 1910. In Irish, the word Innisfail means island of destiny or prosperity, depending which part of the Emerald Isle you come. I served in Innisfail as the Land Commissioner, Police Magistrate and Gold Warden. I also served several state duties in Bowen. According to the Fox's History of Queensland, I was regarded as a representative pioneer of the early days of European settlement in the sugar town of Innisfail. I was born in Ireland on the 28th of February 1838 in Kerry, Kilcarney. And in 1864, following some military service overseas, I married Mary Kathleen, the daughter of a well-known Irish, how are we going?
Some people still can't hear.
Irish family. Okay, I'll move forward. Later in the same year, Mary and I, together with others in the O'Donoghue family, emigrated to Australia. Upon arriving in Brisbane, I soon read news of gold fever in Gympie. And so we went to the goldfields to try our luck. I met with some Irish luck there, fortunately, in a mine called South O'Donoghue, and decided henceforth to invest my newfound pot of gold into pastoral pursuits. Forthwith, I purchased Fernyside, a property on the Dawson River where we grazed sheep and cattle for 6 years. After hard struggles and with flood and drought, I disposed of my grazing property and joined the State Civil Service as an Inspector of Telegraphs. In due course, I was appointed Land Commissioner, Warden and Police Magistrate in Innisfail, and later carried out similar duties in Bowen. Years passed, and in 1903, upon turning 65, I had to retire in accordance with the State Civil Servant Act. The Mayor of Bowen organised a lovely testimonial and civic banquet for me, which I was very grateful for. However, it was with much regret that I relinquished the duties of my triple position. Without a job, I decided to return to the beautiful green hills and valleys of Innisfail, my favourite town in North Queensland. Once back in Innisfail, I set to work and built up a profitable business as an auctioneer and commission agent. I also became a Justice of the Peace for both Queensland and South Australia, as well as Commissioner of Affidavits for the state of New South Wales. At 3 different times, I was elected on the Shire of Johnson Council as a councillor and once as chairman. During my term of office, I promoted and oversaw the construction of the Jubilee Bridge, which was opened in 1923. Prior to the construction of that bridge, you had to cross the Johnson River by ferry. The original Jubilee Bridge stood until it was replaced in 2011. I was fortunate to be blessed with good health, which many thought was a wonderful advertisement for Innisfail. Notwithstanding a strenuous career, I was still going strong well into my 80s. I was holder of valuable property in town, houses, shops, etc. And I've always been and continue to be a firm believer in the opinion that Innisfail is the best of sugar districts. I believed that until the end. Mary and I had 6 children. My sons were John Markham, a barrister, examiner of titles, Sydney, James Patrick, an officer and accountant at South Johnson, and Charles, who was engaged in directing my business interests. Of my daughters, one was Mrs. A.W. Miguel, of Gordonvale, another Mrs. Callender, widow of W.J. Callender, and the third was Nellie, a member of the nursing staff at St. Vincent's Hospital, Sydney. My grandson, Norman Miguel, became the Deputy High Commissioner for Australia in London. Sadly, my wife died on the 31st of December 1915 and is buried here in the cemetery not far from me, just over there, if you find her. I was told that the public spiritedness, which had always distinguished my life, showed little sign of abatement, as evidenced by my keen interest in promoting all that counts in the civic amenities and the prosperity of the district. Here is a report of my activities in the Cairns Post of the 6th of September 1923, in an article titled Men of the Million Pound Town, meaning Innisfail, of course. Quote, it was said by some that to visit Innisfail and not to meet Martin O'Donoghue is not to see Innisfail at all. This is the verdict of many who have paid their casual respects and visits to this prominent sugar town during the course of the past 40 years. Mr. O'Donoghue is now a veteran of a full 85 years of age and is mentally, if not physically, still going strong. He's also a military veteran of the stirring times of the Crimea War, having seen service at the great battles of Inkerman, Balaclava and the siege of Sebastopol, when quite a young man. His military career, training and rank were the factors which probably quickly helped him secure a prominent official position in the Queensland public service. And in 1883, I should say, he was transferred to Innisfail as the first police magistrate, Crown Lands Commissioner, Warden, and all the multifarious official duties attaching to those positions, including later that of Inspector of Pacific Islanders. It was quite a write-up in those days. Thank you. In those early days, a lot of Chinamen drifted into the district and a large number were engaged in gold sluicing along the heads of the Johnson River. Tam Si, the retired Chinese merchant, was then a prominent figure in the town. Johnson River sickness, or fever sickness, was then very prevalent in those early days, and I had my hands full in taking measures to cope with it. And sadly, there were many deaths. Young Dr. Bancroft and a staff of nurses with hospital tents were sent up from Brisbane to deal with the trouble. The only clearing then available was around Burke's Hotel, the first established in Innisfail, which later became the Exchange Hotel, which is now the site of the Cane Cutter Tavern. An early pioneer named Bowles, who was very skillful in fever treatment, also gave great assistance to me. Those who died were buried at Flying Fish Point, where the first cemetery was established. Doctors Hobbs and O'Doherty were sent up as well to investigate the cause of the fever, and decided that it was due to the miasma created, or the bad air created by the decay of the vast quantities of tropical vegetation and felled timber. As a matter of fact, when this was burned, the conditions rapidly improved. Cedar getting was then in full swing, and the sugar industry had got a start at the Innisfail plantation. Mr. T.H. Fitzgerald's mill was the first crushing plant in the district. The Queensland Sugar Company's mill at Marillion was next. Then in 1885, the CSR established their mill and plantation at Gundi. A big trade was then going on in the importation of Kanakas to work the sugar plantations. When there appeared to be difficulty in securing Kanakas, Javanese were sometimes imported, principally for Marillion in large numbers, and these people were sometimes very troublesome. The Javanese were responsible for a great riot in Innisfail in 1885, when on the arrest of one of their women and some of the countrymen, they attacked the watchhouse keeper and police, broke open the lock and released the prisoners. As the police magistrate, I read the riot act, and the Javanese were in turn attacked by the whites, Kanakas and Chinese under my leadership, with Charles Nolan and Senior Constable Keane assisted. In the retreat of the Javanese to Marillion, some were shot and killed while trying to escape. And in the hand-to-hand conflict in town, I was seriously wounded by a slash of a kris, or a short Javanese sword, across the head. Look, and I really don't want to talk. But I'm okay. I was only temporarily put out of action. A royal commission was appointed to visit Innisfail and inquire into the cause and the handling of the riot, but I was complimented, and those concerned exonerated in the matter of the deaths of the Javanese. 36 of the Javanese rioters were arrested by Captain Pennefather of Ingham, tried and sent to jail at Stewart's Creek, and on the expiration of their sentences were deported, but sadly, nearly all of them lost their lives in the sinking of the ill-fated Quetta, a steamer by which they were being transported when she struck an uncharted rock and foundered on Albany Pass near Thursday Island. I died on the 12th day of April 1926. Before I was born. 1926. My death was a result of a fall from a horse at the age of 88. I was 88, not the horse. And now I lie here at rest in my beloved town of Innisfail.
If I could just make an observation.
Yes.
When you consider what an extraordinary life this man had, fighting in the Crimean War and magistrate, justice of the peace, and quite a prominent businessman in the town.
Yeah.
No headstone.
I'll have an Irish whiskey to drink.
Okay.
That's not
No one
usually
likes
there.
public servants.
No.
So, we'll just put this on.
There's no headstone.
Grave tonight has two Good Samaritan sisters in it, and this one here. And I'll just give you a little bit of a history of the Good Samaritan sisters. There's probably some of you here this evening that was taught by the Good Samaritan nuns when they were here in Innisfail. They've been gone for many years now, but I remember them when they first were wearing the serge, the black and white, the long veils, covered from head to toe, little face in amongst starched whites and everything. They changed just before I left school to the lighter white fabric. But if you can imagine the conditions here in this era when they came with the serge fabric that was really more suited to Europe than here. The Sisters of the Good Samaritan have long had an association with Innisfail. Margaret Bailey and Anne Sweeney, at whose gravesides we now stand, belonged to this Australian order, founded in Sydney in 1857 by John B. Paulding, the first Catholic Archbishop of Sydney, to meet pressing spiritual and so Mother General, Mother Mary Birchmans McLaughlin, was approached at Townsville by Bishop Murray of Cooktown with a plea for sisters to go to Innisfail, then the developing sugarcane town of Geraldton. Instead of proceeding to Charters Towers as intended, Mother Mary Birchmans consented to go north to assess the situation. She and her companion were warmly welcomed by the people and charmed with the beauty of the place. Upon her return to Sydney with the Bishop's request, her advisory council agreed to accept the challenge of yet another Queensland foundation. 4 nuns were chosen for the mission. Mother Mary Charles Hiles was the superior, Sister Mary Hilda Bergen, Sister Mary Imelda O'Brien, and Sister Mary Antony Malone. Accompanied by Mother General, the sisters set out what was then a journey of 3 or 4 days on board the Aramac. At Townsville, they were met by Bishop Murray and Father Clancy. Father Clancy, you would be well aware of the association with the Mother of Good Counsel Church here in Innisfail. He built 3 churches in Innisfail because of cyclones, who travelled with them to Innisfail. Their journeys end on the 27th of October in 1903, is described by Sister Mary Antony. She said, "Then we arrived at the mouth of the Johnson. The boat could not cross the bar. It was low tide, but we were met by a tiny boat, the Lally, that bobbed up and down beside the big boat. We lined up with all the passengers looking on, and Mother Mary Birchmans bravely stepped out, and at the word of command from the captain, jumped into the arms of the captain of the Lally and was whisked onto a seat. We then all did likewise. When we were all safely landed, we had a good laugh. It was a very dangerous situation." She goes on to say, "How charmed we all were with the beauty of the Johnson. We landed at the wharf, safe and sound, and were met by Mrs. Levy and Mrs. Dempsey. A senior resident, Mrs. Crowdy, states that it was her father, Luke Shanahan, who provided transport for the sisters in his horse and buggy, and had driven in from his farm at Mundoo. As the convent was still unfinished when the sisters arrived, they began life in true pioneer style. They managed with little in the line of furniture and dined at the presbytery. Sister Imelda gives an account of the settling in. She says, "We dined at the presbytery for 2 weeks. Then suddenly one afternoon, Mother Mary Birchman said, 'We're not going to the presbytery any longer.' She sent down to town and got a few things, went into the kitchen and prepared the meal. That was the first we had in our future home. After about a month, we settled down to regular life. Mother Mary Birchmans had left us. It was then that we felt the loneliness. Sister Mary Antony and I took charge of visitation of the hospital, which was rather a rough kind of place. According to details published by the Cairns Morning Post on the 12th of June 1903, the foundation block of the new convent school was laid on Sunday last by Reverend Dr. Murray, attended by Father Clancy and a large crowd of well-wishers. The estimated cost mentioned as being in excess of £1,000, of which 550 was already in hand, and £90 was placed on the foundation block. Tenders were submitted by the 24th of June and building commenced after decisions were made. The school was opened on the 2nd of November, and a newspaper cutting held in St. Scholastica's archives refers to the blessings of the Geraldton Convent on the 21st of November. Early photos show the position of the convent, school and church, the convent facing Rankin Street in much the same position as it is at present, with church and school facing Owen Street. When the school opened on the 2nd of November 1903, there was an approximate enrolment of 40 pupils. Sister Imelda mentioned among the first May Peters, Nellie Watts, Paddy Levy, Lucy Bullets. Unfortunately, no actual school records still exist, but from the evidence of available photos show that numbers quickly grew. One has the wording 150 on roll, 120 present. By those who knew some of the pupils, it has been identified as being before 1918. When the convent was built, no provisions were made for boarders, but additions were made within a few years to meet the needs of outer areas. A dormitory and facilities eventually catered for 20 to 30 girls. From Mr. Archie Wolfe at Meena Creek, I learnt that a few boys were accepted, a back veranda section being used for them. He named 3 regulars, Shaw, Zammit and Wolfe. The school initially catered for primary grades, but it is known that pupils were soon prepared for state scholarship, which was the main exam at that time, around grade 8. One of the first recorded was Mick Vandeleur in 1913. As some of you may be aware, Mick Vandeleur was a local solicitor in town, and the business still survives today as Vandeleur and Todd. Cultural subjects formed part of the school program from its very beginning. Sister Mary Anthony taught music and painting and pioneered the tradition which saw the convent develop rapidly as a centre with a wide cultural range: singing, painting, art of speech, cello, violin and piano. Over the years, demand grew and a cottage named St. Cecilia's provided extra room for practice and teaching. It has had a variety of uses over the years: music, school and temporary convent for a few years after the 1958 fire. A highlight of Innisfail history in general is the cyclone which struck on the 10th of March 1918. How the sisters fared in that is recorded by Sister Mary Stephanie Freeland, who taught from 1915 to 1926. Her long letter written to the Mother General immediately after the cyclone captures the fury and aftermath of destruction. The church in ruins, the convent practically unroofed and minus kitchen, staff room and back balcony. Of the school, only the floor remained on its high blocks with a piano flattened on the floor. Though church and presbytery were suffering damage, Father Clancy was back and forth during the cyclone, anxious for the safety of the sisters and the 16 boarders then present, some very young. Men came also at times to see if assistance was needed. Father Clancy arranged temporary sleeping accommodation for the sisters and boarders. Sister Stephanie stated that 2 sisters remained in the chapel under a less damaged portion of the roof, and 2 sisters went to the shelter in houses with groups of 8 children where beds and floor were shared. Those who shared the shelter of their homes were mentioned by Sister Stephanie as a Mr. Lawrence and a Mr. Bell. After a few days, some of the children were able to go home, and Mr. Joe McGowan took the rest, except 2 girls, Mary McAvoy and Mari Cosgrove, to his farm. The sisters returned to the convent each day, and when the work of re-roofing began, some cooked for the 16 men employed. Sister Stephanie wrote, "Stew was a great dish for it," went further, and those who were not cooking spent the days under the school, washing blankets and dodging photographers. Bishop Heavey came down from Cairns a few days after the cyclone and invited the sisters to go there for a time, but they chose to remain and share the losses and hardship of the local people. As soon as the convent was re-roofed, school resumed using whatever space and whatever furniture could be found, mostly tables from the boarders' dining room, which had then to be reset for meals. By Christmas, the school had been rebuilt and midnight mass was celebrated there, an extension making it suitable for use as church and school until the present church was completed in 1928. The fires which later destroyed the school in 1956 and the convent in 1958 closed off that first period of history and gave rise to the convent, primary and secondary schools which carry on the work of the pioneers of 1903 and the indomitable spirit of Father Clancy. In a letter written 18 years later to an old friend, Mother Mary Charles wrote on the 27th of October 1921, "Today, 18 years ago, I landed in Geraldton, now Innisfail, the Isle of Destiny. That happy day I felt like Columbus, quite prepared to kiss the earth of my new realm of labour. The fruits of our mission were and are many, and proud I am to have been among pioneers of that spot most favoured by Almighty God." And I'll just read, the 2 nuns that were buried here. The first, Sister Mary Assisium Bailey. After a lifetime of service devoted to the sacred cause of religion, Sister Mary Assisium of Sacred Heart Convent Innisfail died last night. Sister Assisium was the daughter of Mr. G. Bailey and the late Mrs. Bailey of Townsville, and was born in Charters Towers 42 years ago. When a young woman, the late Sister Assisium decided to dedicate her life to the service of God and joined the Order of the Sisters of the Good Samaritan. She came to Innisfail 3 years ago after some years of teaching in various towns. Her gentle nature endeared her to her pupils and to the noble band of sisters with whom she associated. A tragic feature of her death was that she was to celebrate her silver jubilee as a nun in about a month's time. Sister Assisium is survived by her father, Mr. Bailey of Townsville, 2 brothers, Angus and George in Townsville, and 3 sisters, Mrs. J. Ward in Cairns, Mrs. Phyllis and Doris Bailey in Townsville. The funeral service took place at Church of Our Lady of Good Counsel this afternoon. Was an impressive one with sorrowing pupils and members of the Children of Mary Society. The Bishop of Cooktown, the Reverend Dr. Hebe, OSA, conducted the service and officiated at the graveside. It is understood that a Requiem Mass is to be conducted by Reverend Dr. Hebe next week. And the other, Sister Mary Thekla Sweeney. The death of Sister Mary Thekla Sweeney, Good Samaritan Convent in Tully, occurred suddenly yesterday morning on the 14th of March 1949. She was about her ordinary teaching duties during the week, but suffered a heart attack at 7 a.m. yesterday and died almost immediately. The late sister was born at Roma 62 years ago, but when young, her family moved to Hewenden, where she spent most of her life before entering the Good Samaritan Sisters 43 years ago. After her profession and training, she taught at St Mary's College, Charters Towers, and also spent many years at Ayr and Hewenden. All her teaching life was spent in convents in North Queensland. Early this year, she was appointed to the Good Samaritan Convent in Tully, where she was beloved by the children. The remains were brought last night from Tully to the Church of Our Lady of Good Counsel in Innisfail, where solemn Requiem Mass will be celebrated this Monday morning at 10 o'clock, after which the funeral will leave for the Innisfail Cemetery. The late sister is survived by Sister Mary Agnes Sweeney, Lewis Hill Convent in Brisbane, Mrs. Carl of Hewenden, who are her sisters, and 4 brothers still survive, William, Edward, Terence and Len Sweeney. Her brother, Thomas Sweeney, died in Townsville last year. So thank you very much. That draws to an end our cemetery walk for 2023. I hope you enjoyed it. We've got certainly some people that have had an amazing history that are buried here in our cemetery. When you consider that really from 1873, those early days and how rough it was and the type of people that actually came here and founded this town and then what would later become Innisfail is quite admirable, I think. So here's to the pioneers of this town. And just for your information, we actually have a town walk that's doing the Art Deco buildings in town, and that starts tomorrow
10 a.m.
at 10 a.m. and the meeting point is outside the Shire Hall. So if anybody's interested in the town walk, it's actually escorted and some history is told about the various buildings around the town.
It's $20 and you can book on Try Booking.
Yeah. So thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for your support. It's lovely to see you all here this evening.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you.